Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along to this structuring sessions chat for aspirant coaches and trainers. So we're going to be running through a few concepts and things, and it's myself, Rachel Andrews, and Tim Cox that we'll be presenting.
Good morning.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, first couple of housekeeping bits then. As we're all, I would imagine, fairly new to using webinars and that sort of thing for this kind of delivery, I just wanted to run through a couple of bits and bobs. So this presentation is a combination of on-screen presentation and commentary. So ideally you need to be able to see the presentation and see the commentary and hear the commentary. If you've got a slow internet connection, it can be that it's difficult to see both. So in the joining instructions that you received, you can click onto the link to see what's going on the screen, but you can also use the telephone number to dial in and listen to the commentary. So you should be able to pick both up. But in the unlikely event that that doesn't work for you, or if you have some kind of blip in internet connectivity, then actually we have the solution, because this is being recorded. Please do not swear. We're live on channel training. So you will be able to come back to this. It will be put up onto the CPD area of the site, so you'll be able to catch any bits that you missed. So what we've got is also some controls. You'll see that you've got a panel somewhere on your screen, which should look something like the image that's on the left of the presentation. And there's a bunch of different controls there. The main things that we're looking at is the questions. So if you have any questions that you either want to put to myself and Tim as the presenters, or we've got other members of RYA training in the background who might be able to answer that question, then please type the question into that question box. What I'm just going to ask you to do, just to make sure that we've got that, and there's a few people can see that, is I'm just going to ask you to, on the left-hand side of your little box, there's a hand which allows you to put your hand up. Could you just click on that if you can hear me fine and you're understanding what's going on? I'll have a little look to see if we can see some hands going up.
Yeah, there's quite a few going up.
Okay, so that's great. So all the stuff's on there. As I say, it should be fairly straightforward as a presentation. But if you do have questions, please pop them in. The way we'll deal with the questions is if they are something that's relevant to the whole group, then we'll deal with them at the point it's relevant. It might be that it's during the screen that I'm talking about at the time, and I'll have that question at the end of commentary on that screen. It may be that it's just a question for yourself that needs answering back, and then that will be an answer direct back to you through the question box. Or it might be one that we hold on to and we'll ask at the end in a question session. So hopefully that's fairly clear. We all know where the questions box is. If you're finding that the box is interrupting your viewing, then you can also press that orange arrow on the left-hand side of the box, and that will minimize it down. However, you won't be able to see the question box at that stage. You need to open it back up if you want to do that. I've tried to make sure that the screens don't have too much on the left-hand side, so that if you want to keep that up, you can do. Right, let's head into it. Oops. So this is a session on structuring briefings and sessions within the RYA training schemes, and we're going to be looking at 4 different models. We're going to be looking at task, edicts, C, and PAMI. So heading straight off then, task, as it says on there, is this model for an instructor to have a conversation with the trainer. So it's really the trainer-led conversation at the start of a session before the instructor begins and heads off with the session. What we're trying to do is we are encouraging people to become instructors, or even if we're in the SI role and we're having a briefing with our instructors before they head off to start their sessions, is we need to get a few ground rules in place. And certainly as a coach or trainer, we're trying to ensure that the person's time isn't wasted, that they actually have got a good idea what it is they're going to deliver and how it's going to roll out, so that actually you know, as the person looking over that session, actually what you're going to be seeing and what you're expecting to see and what they're hoping to get out of the session. So as it says on there, it does help to promote a safe and unhurried session, which has got some good structure. First one on task then is time. Really important to ask the person how long they think it's going to take, whatever session you've decided between you they're going to do. How long do you think that will take to deliver? And you might want a discussion about that, but it's important that that comes from them, but also that they recognize that a training session in an instructor course is a fairly anesthetized version of a session, and actually they might ask for half an hour to do picking up and mooring in powerboating, but actually you might not think you've got the time for that. So have a discussion with them, get it to a realistic amount of time that they're going to need. I would have thought quite a lot of sessions within a power scheme, certainly you'd be looking at around about the 20 minutes mark. Then we want to know which area are you going to use to run your session. So it's a question straight out to the instructor to explain where they've decided that their session will be better placed. Again, all of this, the learning is from the instructor coming out with the ideas, and a little discussion, maybe a bit of chivying from the coach or trainer to make sure that we've got a session that's going to look good. Then we want to know, is there any safety considerations within that area? So get them to run through what they're thinking about and what the what's pertinent to the operating area or the particular session that they're going to be running, so that you've got a good idea that they've got their eye on what should be happening. And then the key teaching points. So the whole point of delivering a session is that it should be safe, there should be learning, and it should also be fun. But what we need to know from them is what are those key teaching points that they're hoping to get across. And for me, as I'm doing this discussion with a trainee instructor, I like to note down the key teaching points that they say they're going to cover, because that's going to form part of the debrief at the end to see, well, these are the items that you said you wanted to cover. Did you cover them? And we can kind of, it almost forms a bit of a contract in terms of, this is what you said, did you deliver? Let's have a dig into that. So making sure that they are looking for and delivering as many of the key teaching points as possible. And obviously you will start off with that not being, it's going to be some of them during the first few sessions, but we're expecting to really get all of those key teaching points in further down the line. So just understanding what the point of the session is and what they're hoping to get out of it. So that all comes out as task, time, area, safety, and key teaching points. So that one as a model is really for the discussion between the coach or trainer and their trainee instructor before a session starts. Moving on to the next one, I'm hoping that you're fairly familiar with this one, edicts, which is our coaching model that runs throughout quite a number of the RYA training schemes. And the reason we use this one is that it picks up all the learning styles in one go, so that rather than having to think our way through, and for a training instructor, it allows them to hang their hat on something and to really get a structure which works and sweeps in everyone's learning style. So digging into that, then we have the explanation, and I've got a little picture there of someone with a whiteboard, because that can be really helpful, can't it? We don't just want to be talking it out. We need to use some kind of visual aid for that, which might be models, it could be a drawing on a whiteboard or in a wet notes, but something that everybody can see so that they know what's going to be happening, and importantly, what the key points are. So the explanation, as it says in there, it needs to be pretty brief, to be honest, and to the point, and people need to understand what's the point of what we're doing it and when we would actually do this in real time. So the demonstration, the instructor needs to give a good demo, and it needs to be in a position, you need to position the students so that they're actually able to see what's going on. And as it says on there, it's really important that we don't just go off sailing off and having a whale of a time. We need to just make sure that the key point we're asking them to focus on and look at is visible. They can hear anything. If you're actually going to say something, that and in a powerboat, that's quite a lot easier, that you can actually say it and everybody can hear. So this one is really about setting it up and ensuring that everybody can get the visual and pick up any spoken word that might be of interest around the demonstration. Really important to make sure that they get the key things that they're going to have to copy when it comes over to their time, and that is the next step. So the imitation, where the students are going to get to have a crack at it themselves. We've got to let them have a go at it so that we've got things to talk about as we debrief. The only time we're going to interrupt them is if there's a problem with, if there's a safety issue. So if something comes into your sailing area that's unexpected, or something they're doing is going to be dangerous. If it's just not quite right, then we can address that at the next stage. But let it roll, give them enough time to form an opinion and get an idea about how the activity or how the skill develops. Then we need to have a chat with them. We need to do the feedback aspect of this. And it's really about getting them to get to the bottom of if something was successful, what were the successful aspects that built up towards that? And if it wasn't so successful, at which point during the maneuver did the success of it start to fall apart? So trying to get them to become a little self-analytical, but also guiding them through that conversation. And if it went well, of course, we're going to be telling that. But once we've given feedback, we need to give people an opportunity for another go. So it's really easy to fall into the explanation, demonstration, imitation, correction. Okay, we're there now. And that's something that can be quite easy to do on an instructor course if we don't follow it right through. But the key point in this is that we embed the learning and we allow people to have another go. Because if we're going to give feedback and then we don't allow a second go at it, what are we saying there? Well, to my mind, I think we're saying, you know, in a perfect world, it should be like this, but what you did was okay. But no, it's important that if we've got a skill to put across, that we see it right the way through. So after the correction stage, we head off into the training part, which is where they get to have another go or two. It might be that we do it from a different angle. It might be that we get them to choose somewhere else. If we're doing, for example, picking up a mooring in a powerboat, it may be to start with you've deliberately picked that the instructors deliberately picked that the students will be heading to a buoy which is upwind of them, so they're going to be using the wind potentially as a brake, and then moving it forwards and letting them train. It might be that they then end up picking their own one to go to, and at that stage we're able to see whether or not they've really understood the environmental factors that are affecting the success of it, and whether they come at it from a good angle. So as it says on there, practice is making progress, not perfection. So there will still be that element of feedback and discussing how things went. And that's where we come into the summary, where the student is going to be, hopefully you can draw out, or your instructor can draw out of the student what it was that built up to make that work. What are the points they need to repeat to make it successful? And what are the bits that they might need to just focus on to polish it, to make sure that it's as good as it can possibly be as a maneuver. So really important that we finish the edicts with a summary so that we're able to draw out of the student what it is they need to do to repeat the success and to be able to move that forwards into the next session. So as it says on there, edicts, so explanation, demonstration, imitation, correction, training, and summary. And I'm suspecting that's probably a revision for most people, but I'm just going to hand over now to Tim to take us through the next bit.
Okay, so hopefully this will work.
Over to you, Tim.
Okay. Okay, so what we're going to look at now is CSEA. This is something I came across a number of years ago. It's a briefing model to help instructors remember the important aspects of a brief and to get them to put it across in a brief, logical way. It's really useful when teaching multiple crafts such as single-hand dinghies, windsurfers, and especially PWs, personal watercraft, or jet skis, as most people call them. So see, the S stands for safety. This are recall signals, so our hand signals, any sound signals we might want to use during the session, and what to do in an emergency if there's a capsize or something like that. So this would be used by the instructor just before the imitation stage of edicts. Okay, so the next part is the environment. So this is essentially the area that you're going to use. A bit like in the task, when we are the instructor, we want to set out boundaries, areas we're going to use, anything that's happening in that area regarding wind, tide, the elements, what can affect the craft, and also any hazards in the area. So are there any large ships coming through? Are there anything that they need to be aware of, any rocks, things like that. So letting them know about the area they're going to be operating in and any hazards in there. Okay, move on. Okay, and then the final part, really important, sometimes forgotten, but the actual activity, what the task is and the aims of the task, how long it's going to run for. So it might be a number of times around the course or something like that. And also, really importantly, direction of travel, the way round people are going to go around the course, for example. Really important in the activity, we do let them know about the key teaching points we've been talking about earlier. Okay, so that's SEAC. It's a nice, easy way for everyone to remember how to do a decent brief. The environment and the activity. Okay. Some or most of you probably have come across the PAME or PAME. So this is a model we like the instructors to put across to the students, let them take away to encourage confidence and decision making for their boating manoeuvres. So it's one that we as instructors put across to our students, and then they can take that with them, so they've got their little model as we have our ones. Okay, so the first one, the P, is for plan. We need to make considerations on what's affecting the boat. So tide, wind, things like that, other traffic in the area, so to be aware of that. Any hazards to the craft or the crew, all the boat equipment preparation, and crew communications. So quite often when I'm running instructors courses, some of these parts actually get missed out. So they're so focused on running their session that things like crew communication and putting out fenders, for example, get missed. So we want to encourage our students to be going away with this planning, but also as instructors and trainers, we need to be thinking about this model as well. Okay, approach. So we've made our plan, we've decided which is the best way to approach. Now we need to consider all the directions, the angles, the speed we're going to approach the maneuver. So for example, coming alongside, maybe a bit like this landing on the runway, we need to consider how fast we're going to come into it, what angle we're going to come in, and just making sure it's done correctly. And then maneuver. Okay, so this is the actual boat handling, how we're going to control the speed, what controls we're going to use to do that, controlling the direction of the craft. So how we're going to use different elements to control our speed. In powerboat and the throttle, in sailing, could be the main sheet, spill and fill, and then controlling our direction with the steering, but also the other elements we're using. So that's the actual sort of technical maneuver part of that. Then finally, the escape. Now the escape should also come into your planning stage of your maneuver. So we should be thinking about this the whole time. But what we're going to do if it goes wrong, where's your escape? and as it says, this can influence your plan. Early escape minimizes damage, injury, and embarrassment, but making an early escape is a best seamanship decision than actually crashing into the pontoon or something like that. So we want to have that escape always in the back of our head, and if we need to use it, we're going to make that early decision to escape. So that's the escape. So PAME, so our plan it all before, the approach, angles and speeds, the maneuver, how we actually do the maneuver, the skills, and then finally our escape. What are we going to do if it goes wrong? Where's our escape plan?
So that was a short and sweet intro to our to the models that we're using for structure. Do we have any questions? You'll have seen halfway through where I attempted to look at the questions, and I interrupted the running of the screen. So if we've got any questions, please feel free to ask them.
We haven't got any at the moment, Rach. If you do want to ask any questions, then just pop them into the questions box, and then I can pose them to either Tim or Rachel. So do let us know.
Oops. I'm going to say we're escaping scot-free at this stage.
I think you're right, Rachel. Thank you very much, Tim and Rachel. Anything you just want to end with?
Just I think it's important that we take the time to just review our instructing to make sure that when we come towards coach or trainer, especially on things like the selection, that what we're putting across is a structured session where it's easy for somebody watching it to identify the steps of learning that are occurring, and that you have a really clear understanding of what the session's aiming to achieve, and hopefully setting it up using some of those methods there to achieve it. If it's something that you're not being used to using, or for example, it might have been lost in the annals of time, then maybe a little review to specifically PAMI, Plan, Approach, Maneuver, Escape. That one quite often gets missed and is really key. And if you haven't looked at task, it might be something that's worth having a think about, and whether or not you are overtly using it, or you're just thinking, you know what, actually I'll try to get that in my head as I go to plan a session, or as just before I do that briefing using C, I'll just make sure I know exactly what I'm about to set off and do. And hopefully those things will give you something to hang your hat on. But yeah, good luck having a go with them, and having a little read around it and thinking about incorporating them into your session. Thank you for coming along.
Oh, Rachel, I've got a question here, which is about attendance on selection on the actual assessment day, and whether we would be looking for the candidates to be using the models during their assessment when they're running their sessions.
So on the PowerBit side of things, we'll certainly be expecting to see evidence of edicts through the session, and really PAMI should come into it. We're not necessarily expecting overt usage of C or task. Task will be something that we're using and we'll be drilling on the trainer's course, but getting a head around that beforehand is useful, but that is certainly something we'll be putting a lot of time and effort into, because the trainer's course is all about the briefing and debriefing. We know that you can instruct by the time you get on there. It's about topping and tailing and being able to observe other sessions. So yes, on selection, edicts and PAMI for sure, and good briefings, and I guess that C would help with that for sure. Amanda, you might have something to say on the dinghy side.
Yeah, I'd echo that. So when you're running a session, we're looking for a good structure. So any of those models would reflect using that. And actually that comes on to another question that someone's asking about other models that haven't been shown today. Is it okay to use them? And I think Rachel pointed that out at the beginning of her presentation. She was just looking to cover a few of them. There are many others out there, and I think in essence we are looking for you to structure in an organised manner that puts across this session clearly for people to follow. The use of PAMI and things like that, obviously within the dinghy environment, is very akin to delivering seamanship skills, and so we would be looking for that model in its form to ensure all the components are put across clearly and concisely for your students to follow and then potentially repeat. So I think probably within all schemes it's quite consistent in its use, but we're not stating that they're the only ones you should be using. They're kind of a sample of a few that are well used within the schemes. Would you agree with that, Rach?
The only thing I would say is that once we move past the trainer's course or the coach's course and we're actually out there training our new instructors, as I said at the start, things like edicts are there for a new instructor, hang their hat on and make sure they're covering everything. And it is the information in all of our instructor handbooks are covering these models. So once somebody leaves your instructor course and needs to refer back to something, everything they're going to be seeing within the RYA scheme will be within our handbook. So although there are certainly lots of different ones such as ideas, and through the different sports they've all got different things, just be wary that your instructor candidates will be then referring back to RYA material, which will only be probably only mentioning the ones that we are talking about here. So the possibility of avoiding confusion during the course, I guess, is something to consider when you're thinking about how you're going to deliver structure and get your trainee instructors to deliver structure. Think about what they're going to refer to afterwards.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Just one other point. We've had a question, but I'm not going to get you to answer it now. It's about debriefing a session that's used structure and things like that. And that's actually a webinar we're going to cover later on in this series. So I'm not going to ask Tim and Rachel to touch on that now, because I think it's a much bigger question with a lot more advice that sits behind it. So it's a great question, and actually it's forming a webinar in the series that's following shortly. But thank you very much. It's a good question, and it will be answered shortly. But otherwise, I think that's it, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim, for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening.